Hi, we're here on the Temple Mount this morning during the festival of Sukkot. And the question is, how is Sukkot especially tied to the Temple Mount? I'm sure Rabbi Levi's got a really good answer to that question.
Well, actually, one of the most important things about Sukkot Festival was, in fact, the visitation to the Temple Mount. Everything in the Sukkot Festival took place here. This was the premier place of all service to God. People would come from all over the country. They would come to Jerusalem. They would bring what's called a Karban Chagigah, or a special Chagigah offering. It started with 13 offerings on the first day, and then went down to 12 on the second day, 11 on the third day, etc. One of the many things done here on Sukkot was the Misuch HaMayim, where they would go down to the Shiloh. There would be a procession that would leave the Temple Mount, and they would go down to the Shiloh spring, gather water, come back here with singing and dancing, back into the temple. They would pour it into the altar at the beginning of the morning prayer.
Behind me is the women's courtyard. What special thing would happen here during the festival of Sukkot?
One of the most special things about the Sukkot holiday was the Simchat Beit HaShoeva, singing and dancing that took place here in the Temple Mount. It took place specifically in the women's courtyard. Singers and dancers and jugglers, the holiest members of the nation would be in the center dancing while everybody else stood around them and watched and were inspired to come closer to God.
I have an interesting question for you. Is there anything different about Sukkot after the Shemitah year?
Immediately following the Shemitah year, during the Sukkot festival, when everybody came to Jerusalem, there was an additional mitzvah called Hakel. Everybody, men, women, and children would come up to the Temple Mount, and they would all stand and crowd the entire surface of the Temple Mount and listen to the Melech, the king, read from the Torah and remind them and give them a spiritual revitalization of their connection to God. That's something that was unique, specifically following the Shemitah year.
I have an interesting question for you. What role did the Herodian expansion play in the Sukkot festival?
One of the main things of the Temple Mount was the Itztaba, or the portico, that Herod built to the south of the expansion. And one of the main things that this was known for was on Sukkot. When the first day of Sukkot fell Shabbat, people would come to the temple, and before Chag, they would bring their lulavim and etrogim, and they would store it on the roof. When they would come to the Temple Mount the next morning, there were ushers standing on the roof who would be throwing down their lulavim and etrogim. The Talmud tells us that everybody would make a declaration before, and that in case they got something that wasn't theirs, they would give it to their friends, so that way there would be no problem of using someone else's lulav and etrogim.
I have an interesting question for you. What is unique about the morning services here on the Temple Mount during Sukkot?
Every morning during Sukkot, they would place a very large arava branch, a myrtle branch, next to the altar, next to the mizbeach. They would place it there throughout the entirety of the morning services. Afterwards, they would do something called Hoshanot, where they would take that arava branch and go around the altar and circle it. And on Hoshana Rabbah, they would circle the altar 7 times. Today, in traditional Judaism, we take our lulav and etrogim and do Hoshanot around the bima in the shul. However, that is to remember service around the altar with the arava branch.